Pre-algebra lesson 113, the inch scale and the metric scale. So hopefully this is a review lesson for a lot of you. We're just going to be talking about how to use a ruler. You see, I have this little 6-inch ruler. I don't really use a full 1-foot ruler anymore. And that's something that you'll probably be getting away from. As you move into high school classes, and especially in college, having a really short 6-inch ruler or a 4-inch ruler is much more useful than having a full-size 1-foot long ruler. Because 1-foot long rulers get a little unwieldy, and sometimes you'll even find little metal 4 or 5-inch rulers with holes punched in them, so you can keep them in your binder. And having this little small ruler becomes very useful in drawing shapes, sketching things. It's a very good tool to have. So let's talk about the inch scale. The interesting thing about the inch scale on a ruler is that in the English measurements, these little tick marks in the middle by size cut each measurement in half. Now, what I mean by that is right in here, if I look in between the 1 and the 2, right? This is the next biggest line right here. And we can see clearly that this line is halfway in between 1 and 2. So that means this line is the half-inch marker, right? And we can see this line repeated here and here every time there's a half-inch. Now, what we can do is we can count by those increments. So if we go here, that's half an inch, plus 1 is 1, and then 1.5, and then 2, and then 2.5, and then 3, 3.5, 4, right? So we see how that kind of works out. Now, if we see the next smallest increment, if we go in between the half-inch and the 1, the next increment is this one right here. That's actually half the size of 1/2. Now, with fractions, when you go smaller, the denominator gets bigger. So instead of this being 1/2 of 1/2, this is actually 1/4, right? So then we can see that's 1 1/4, 1 2/4, 1 3/4, 4/4, or 2, okay? So it goes 1/2, 1/4, and then halfway in between 1/4 and 1, that's 1/8, right? And then halfway in between 1/8 and 1, that's 1/16. So the way metric measurements work is we just take each increment, keep having it, and make a fractional portion of the number. And that's how we measure lines, right? So we can see here on this one, there's a bunch of different markers pointed out. Like for example, this right here, this is 3/4 of an inch because we go, that's half, well that's a fourth, so that's 1, 2, 3/4, okay? So the numerator will tell you how many increments of that size you're at, and then the denominator will always be the fraction of the unit, okay? Now, what you may notice is some of your rulers don't have as small as 1/16. Like right here, we see 3 and 1/16. That's okay. So I'm going to go ahead and use my ruler on example 113.2. My ruler only goes down to 1/8, and that's typically what a lot of rulers will go to. We can still use this to figure out the answer. So if I have to measure this line segment, my ruler only goes to 1/8. What I'm first going to do is I make sure I line up the 0 line on the left end. Some of you will be tempted to line up the edge of the ruler. That's actually wrong. We need to line up the line at 0 with the left edge of the line. Once I line up the line at 0, I can line this up, and you can see my ruler is clear. I'm a big fan of see-through rulers and protractors because it helps you see better. And as I count, I see I've got 1 inch, 2 inches, and then, oh no, this tick mark, it's right in between my smallest measurement, which, remember, my smallest measurement is 1/8. So I can see this is 2 and, okay, so if my smallest measurement is 1/8, and this is halfway in between them, well then that just means that this is a 16th. So now to figure out the 16ths, I'm going to count. So I go 2 and 1/8, 2/8, 3/8, 4/8, 5/8, 6/8. So I'm halfway in between 6 and 7/8, right? So if I were to count that in 16ths, well 6/8, if I were to convert it to 16ths, we'll go ahead and we'll do this on paper. So I'm at 2 and 6/8, right? I'm in between 2 and 6/8 and 2 and 7/8. I got to figure out what the 1/16th number is right there at that point. Let's convert this to 16ths. 6/8 converted to 16ths is going to become 12/16ths. 7/8 converted to 16ths is 14/16ths. Is it easy to figure out what this number is now? Right, it's just the number in between 12 and 14. So it's 13/16ths. So this number right here, I can see, even if my ruler doesn't have that tick mark, I can see, okay, well that's going to be 13/16ths. So to measure that line segment would be 2 and 13/16ths inches. And we mark inches with these little quotation marks right here. Okay, so that's a shorthand notation for English measurements. In English measurements, you can mark inches with 2 tick marks. We can mark feet with 1 tick mark. So if I were to put down 2 with 1 tick mark, and then we'll say 3 and 1/4 with 2 tick marks. What I'm saying here is 2 feet and 3 1/4 inches. All right. Or you could just put the old-fashioned label inches. Okay. Now let's talk about metric scale. All right. So English scale is a little confusing. You gotta really understand your fractions for English scale. Metric scale is much simpler. Everything is just broken up into tens, right? So on metric scale, we've got centimeters, right? And if we count the tick marks between each centimeter, let's go ahead and zoom in on this. If I count the tick marks here, I see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 tick marks for each centimeter. So each one of these are broken into tenths, which means I can just use decimal or decimal place value to figure out the answers to these. So, for example, this line right here, it stops right there. So all I have to do to figure this out, to figure out how many centimeters this is, I just go 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so that's 4.7 centimeters. So I can just use decimals on the metric scale. That is very cool. So to measure that line, it's just 4.7 centimeters. Let's talk about how we'd use that on this. So I take my ruler, I turn it around to the metric side, right? And it's in centimeters. I need to measure this, and I see that this is, let's see here, it looks like 53. So 5.3 centimeters, okay? That's 5.3 centimeters. Now, the other cool thing about the metric scale is these little tiny tick marks, not only are they 1/10 of a centimeter, they are also the exact distance of a millimeter. So, as I figured this, it was 5.3 centimeters. If I just multiplied 5.3 times 10, I have the number of millimeters. So 5.3 centimeters or 53 millimeters. Okay, so the metric system is pretty simple as far as measurement goes. If you guys have any questions on this, let me know on the school website. But that's it for this lesson, and I will see you in class.